What's going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we are looking at the game Hikaru Nakamura versus Leinier Dominguez Perez from this week's Title Tuesday tournament on chess.com. So this was a blitz game, but wow, Hikaru was playing in full beast mode today. He actually sacrificed a full pawn on move 3 against Leinier's Sicilian defense. And from there, the game was just crazy. I mean, the tactical and strategic ideas in this Sicilian defense game were just off the charts, and I'm going to break it all down for you right now. Okay, in the game, Hikaru opens 1 e4, and Leinier obviously goes for 1 c5, the Sicilian defense. Now, Leinier is one of the biggest experts in the world on the Najdorf variation, but today, Hikaru's having none of that. He goes d4, and after Leinier takes the pawn, he goes c3, the Smith-Morra gambit. What is the idea? Well, if black is to take the pawn on c3, Hikaru captures back knight c3, and from there he's going to go knight f3, bishop c4, short castles, and have tremendous compensation for the sacrificed pawn. Now, technically, taking on c3 is the strongest move in the position, but most grandmasters want to avoid that line. It is just so dangerous as black. You can get blown off the board very fast. So in the game, Leinier goes knight to f6 instead, simply attacking the pawn on e4. And now after e5, knight d5, we have some kind of Alapin variation after the move 2c3. Of course, the other way to reach this line is simply 2c3, knight f6, e5, knight d5, d4, c takes. And suddenly we have the exact same position as in the game, just through a different move order. Okay, from here, white's strongest move is simply c takes d4. However, Hikaru has a different idea in mind. He continues with queen takes d4. Now, this move is slightly dubious because all black has to do is go e6, defending the knight on d5, then knight c6, hitting the queen. And black's going to have a slight advantage, and that is what happens in the game. Simply e6, then knight c6, hitting the queen. Now, Hikaru goes queen e4, technically the strongest move, but this gives Leinier an idea. He strikes in the center with the move f5. Now, you might be asking, why would Hikaru allow black to gain space in the center like this, hitting the queen with the knight and the f5 pawn? Well, you're going to find out. It turns out Hikaru Nakamura probably looked at this line specifically before the game, and he had some ideas in mind. Now, queen e2 from Hikaru. This looks crazy. I mean, you're blocking that bishop on f1, but this is the strongest move. He's going to follow up with the move g3, intending bishop g2, and then short castles. And surprisingly, Hikaru is going to have a very tight but solid structure on the king side with that fianchettoed bishop. Okay, here, Leinier showing why he is an expert in the Sicilian defense with 1 c5 against 1 e4. He goes for the combative move b5. What the heck is the idea behind this move? I mean, isn't Leinier simply sacrificing a pawn on b5? And the answer is yes. Technically, Hikaru can take on b5. However, here, Leinier is going to go queen c7 followed by a5 and bishop to a6, putting pressure on that queen. And it turns out black is more than okay here. Black even has the solid advantage. So instead of taking the pawn on b5, giving Leinier everything he wants in the game, instead Hikaru goes g3, just continuing his plan. Now from here, both sides develop. Leinier a5, intending bishop a6, and Hikaru simply goes bishop g2, continuing his idea. Now, bishop a6, castles, and bishop c5 from Leinier. So far, these are all the best moves from Leinier in the game as black. He is simply preparing castling on the king side. And I mean, what is Hikaru going to do here? Starts rook d1, castles. And before we continue, this is a good opportunity to talk strategy real fast. Here we do have a very atypical or unusual pawn structure on the board. Of course, black with those pawns on the queen side very far advanced, and this pawn on f5 gaining space on the king side. On the other hand, white has a very powerful pawn on the e5 square, but this pawn could be a weakness later in the game if black were to attack it with, I don't know, queen c7, ganging up on that pawn on e5. So from here, white really has the burden of trying to start a kingside attack or some sort of active play. If Hikaru does not get that active play going, then Leinier is going to take over in the game on the queen side or even on the king side somehow. So Hikaru, with that in mind, he finds the strongest idea knight to g5. I mean, Hikaru really gets style points for this move. The idea, as we're about to see, is he wants to go queen to h5, ganging up on that pawn on h7. Now, Leinier can defend it with the move h6, but then after knight h3, that knight is rerouting to the f4 square, and it may even have access to the weak light square, specifically g6, in the near future. So Hikaru showing his composure with the very strong idea, queen h5 right away, threatening checkmate. Okay, back to the game. Now Leinier goes queen b6, putting pressure on that f2 square. Very good idea. Of course, that pawn is temporarily defended by the knight on h3, but Hikaru is going to have to be very, very careful not to screw that up. Okay, now knight d2 from Hikaru, the best computer move, or as I say, the best Hans Niemann move. I'm just kidding, Hans Niemann, I love you. And finally, Leinier makes a slightly inaccurate move, and this move allows Hikaru to simply take over in the game. Now, the move he played in the game is the move f4. And it's not immediately obvious why this is a mistake. I mean, this looks like a very logical idea. He wants to threaten f3, gaining more space on the king side and turning that f pawn into an attacking piece. However, here's the critical idea. That move f4 is premature, sort of like my dating life in high school, simply premature. So what's the problem? Well, this move f4 gives up that e4 square, and Hikaru takes advantage of it right away with knight to e4. Oh my goodness, that knight is now officially a monster. Of course, instead of f4 a move earlier, Leinier should have just continued gaining space all over the board with a4 and then waiting for the move knight to f3 and only then f4. However, after the immediate f4 and knight e4, suddenly Hikaru Nakamura springs to life and gains the advantage in the game. And I'm telling you, Hikaru does not let up from here on forward. So what is Leinier supposed to do? Well, he starts kicking the queen. Hikaru retreats, but then again h5, hitting the queen once again, and Hikaru retreats further to the e2 square. Okay, Leinier gets some sort of active play on the queen side, and now he switches to the queen side with b4. But then after c4, here Hikaru simply blocks down the queen side and kicks back the knight. Okay, Leinier goes f takes g3, but this is another mistake in the position. Instead of that, he had to go f3 here. The idea is, yes, you are giving up that pawn, but after bishop takes and then rook to c8, Leinier is, I mean, heck, who am I kidding? f3 is some wild computer idea, some Hans Niemann idea, and I simply do not understand it. I mean, if you get the idea behind f3 better than I do, go ahead and drop a comment in the chat. All right, instead, f takes g3 on the board. This move looks more logical to me, but it turns out it is weaker for some unknown reason that I can't comprehend. Now Hikaru takes back, h takes g3, and now we really do have a critical mistake from Leinier. He takes the pawn on e5, but that is not the right idea. Instead of that, he simply had to activate the rook on a8, perhaps rook to c8, or maybe rook a to f8 would have been better. But instead, rook takes e5 on the board. And the real problem with this move is twofold. I mean, Hikaru simply goes queen c2, and now e5 is an extremely awkward square for the rook. I mean, we could definitely see it potentially being trapped in the future with perhaps f4. I mean, right now, f5 is technically a retreat square for the rook, but that is going to be one awkward rook for the rest of the game. And beyond that, Hikaru has the idea of going knight to g5, threatening queen h7, and that is going to be so dangerous for Leinier as black. Now, Leinier, he has to get something going, and he goes for the move b3, trying to get active, and it's hard to criticize this move. I mean, he has to do something active, or Hikaru is simply going to take over in this blitz game. Now, the best move for Hikaru is queen takes b3. That is not what's played. Instead, he plays the move a takes b3 in the game. And I mean, it's not a catastrophic mistake. However, the problem is this gives black the b4 square for the knight, and Leinier takes advantage immediately. Knight b4. I mean, it's not just the knight. It's the fact that the knight has tempo on the queen, forcing it to retreat. Now, queen c3 from Hikaru. He gives up that idea of knight to g5, threatening queen h7. However, he does get the attack attack on that rook on e5, so not bad. Now here things are already so dicey for black that the computer recommends an absolutely unthinkable idea. And yes, that idea is rook takes e4. You have to sacrifice the rook. Gotham Chess has entered the chat. What's the idea? Well, after white takes back with the bishop, black is going to go d5, and suddenly black's pieces are starting to come alive in this position. I mean, black even has the idea of going h4 next, trying to blow open the king side, and at the very least, this is going to be one complicated position for white to defend. But instead of rook takes e4, here Leinier goes for the move knight to g6, and this really is just a simple blunder. I mean, if you like puzzles, go ahead and try and solve this one. It's not that complicated. I'm going to say you deserve one happy meal if you can find this move, just one. And yes, the key idea is simply knight takes bishop, knight takes c5, and you're taking the bishop, but you're also unleashing the discovered attack on the rook, and that is going to be all she wrote. Queen takes, bishop takes, and suddenly Hikaru's up a full rook. I mean, no, technically the extra rook is not active yet. It's stuck on a1, but I mean, this is just too much. Hikaru is too good to be up a rook. And now let's see how Hikaru finishes off this game as white. I mean, Leinier tries to get something going, but Hikaru defends no problem. The knight on h3 defending the f2 square. Now rook c2, very tricky, but Hikaru simply offers a queen trade, and when black denies it, he says, how about another queen trade? And here Leinier takes that knight on h3, but Hikaru takes the one on g6, and he's still up a full rook. Now Leinier still has some tricky ideas. I mean, he sacks the rook on f2, but here Hikaru stays cool, calm, and collected, just checking on e8, taking on h5, and ultimately forcing that queen trade. And that is going to be just about all she wrote. And in this position, Leinier Dominguez Perez, the top-rated super grandmaster, resigns to Hikaru Nakamura. He's down a full rook, and that is just all she wrote in this game. Wow, what a performance from the number 2 rated grandmaster in the world, Hikaru Nakamura. Well played, sir. Now, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and check out my Hikaru Nakamura playlist, which should be showing up on your screen right now. And I'll see you in the next video.